Listen to this. This was Harry Styles' big hit from 2-3 years ago, which sounds a lot like this song from the 80s. That's just one example, but looking at the top 10 most streamed songs of the last 10 years on Spotify, we see that around half of them use such 80s synth sounds. I constantly found myself having this thought listening to new songs these past couple years of how they'll sound kind of nostalgic and old-timey, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was until I did more research and realized that it's due to all these 80s sounds being used. So today I want to go through iconic 80s sounds used on 2020's pop hits and how they work, starting with lead instruments like synthesizers to rhythm instruments like guitar, bass, drums, and finally the vocals. So one of the most iconic 80s sounds in use today are these high 80s synthesizers. So 80s synths tend to have this reverby, spacey and shimmering sound, something like, and it's used a lot on popular songs of the last few years like the particular synthesizer that invented this high 80s synth sound was the Prophet Phi, introduced in 1978 and became super popular in the 80s with countless artists using this sound. So this high synth sound is often used for playing lead or the melody versus the rhythm. That's why it sounds higher, so the melody it's playing can cut through well. And artists often use this high synth sound to add a second melody line on top of the melody that the singer is singing, so the song can sound more interesting with kind of two melodies going at once. So what makes this synth sound nostalgic in the 80s is really the delay and reverb effects applied on top. So here's how the synth would sound without any effects at all. And here's with everything, delay plus reverb. Just sounds super big and just nostalgic in the 80s now. Now moving on to the rhythm. Another key part of the nostalgic sound on modern 2020s pop music is this kind of 80s fuzzy bass sound, which kind of sounds like this kind of sound. Again, very kind of spacey and cyberpunkish, and it's used on a lot of popular songs in the last few years like
People dream high in the quiet of the night, you know.
This particular fuzzy bass synth sound is the Mini Moog synth, introduced in 1970 originally, and it was popularized in the 80s by big artists like. One main benefit of using a fuzzy bass tone like this one is that it cuts through way better, so it's really great for dance music where they usually feature more in-your-face bass lines, or else bass is usually way less noticeable in a song. As a fun experiment, let's hear how the song Dance Monkey would sound with a regular sounding bass. And here's the original again. Sounds way more interesting and just dancier. Oftentimes though, on 2020s pop songs like on Cruel Summer by Taylor Swift, they kind of tone down the fuzziness a little bit, so it sounds a bit more modern, just slightly though, like this. Versus. So not be as immediately obvious that it's just taken from the 80s. Next, moving on from synths, another common 80s sound that's making a comeback in the 2020s is this sonic-y, reverby, and late summer vibe kind of guitar. Sounds something like. And we can hear it a lot on recent hits like. This shimmering, cyberpunkish, and kind of neo-futuristic guitar sound was popularized in the 80s by big artists like. Again, this guitar sound, just like the 80s synth sounds that I showed earlier, uses a lot of delay and reverb effects, but also uses a chorus-like effect. And as a fun example, here's what Sabrina Carpenter's big hit Espresso would sound like without any guitar effects applied. And here's the original version with all the effects again. Sounds way more nostalgic. Now, it's rare on a song to hear both this 80s kind of sonic guitar sound and the 80s high synth melody sound from earlier, since usually both the guitar sound and the high synth sound will occupy kind of higher frequencies. So they would clash a lot of the time and not gel well together when played on the same song. Not to say it never happens, but just way less. Next, very importantly, we got the drums. The best way to demonstrate this 80s nostalgia drum sound would be to listen to Blackpink's Rosé and Bruno Mars's big hit, APT, which is inspired by this 80s song. What we notice is that not only do the drums sound reverby, again, 80s sounds tend to sound kind of spacey and just shimmering, but they also sound snappy here. But again, on 2020 songs, they tone down kind of the reverby or spaciness a little bit more and keep the snappiness. For example, listening to the beat on APT again, on APT it sounds more like, while on 80s songs the drums sound more like. That's what makes 2020's pop so cool. They make use of 80s sounds and twist them a slight bit, or even like pair them with like modern sounds. For example, maybe they would pair an 80s synth sound with like a regular modern sounding bass sound. So it sounds both nostalgic but also new at the same time. If you're interested in learning about how this APT drum pattern works in more detail, check out this video where I go through the beat, show more variations, and explain the beat with more examples. Finally, we got the vocals. And it's actually quite straightforward. Essentially, it just uses a lot of reverb and delay and combines them together. Think 2020 songs like
Birds of a feather, we should stick to one boy, and he won't stop calling. I know we be so complicated.
This style of vocal production was popularized in the 80s by artists like Phil Collins, like on the famous In the Air Tonight. This more spacey vocal sound helps to give a more intimate feel, since when listening on headphones, for example, it feels like I'm surrounded by this person's voice, which is rather soothing and comforting. Now, having gone through the iconic 80s sounds used on 2020's pop music, I thought it'd be cool to try making a 2020 style beat using the sounds that we talked about. Let's see how it goes. So I'm going to start with the drums. I'm going to start by using this more kind of toned down 80s reverby and snappy drums. That sounds a bit more modern. Then add a fuzzy and spacey 80s style bass. Starting to come together more, but I'm going to add an 80s style rhythm guitar part to drive the song more. Now I'm actually going to add a second rhythm guitar part to make the beat sound more complex. Finally, I'm going to add a high synth part for the melody so the beat pops more. Now let's listen to how it sounds all together. Not too bad, I think. Just trying really hard to balance using 80s sounds, all the while not making it sound like too over the board by blending in some more modern sounds, like using a more modern sounding drum set. So it sounds more like 2020s 80s nostalgia versus a straight up 80s beat. As we were saying, 2020s pop music love using these 80s shimmering, spacey, kind of cyberpunkish sounds to make their songs sound more nostalgic, while kind of adding in some modern sounds or modern interpretations of these 80s sounds to make the songs sound new and different as well. If you're interested in learning more about popular sounds used on recent pop music, check out this video where I go over the most popular singing style of the 2020s used by artists like Billie Eilish, Sabrina Carpenter, and Ariana Grande. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.